Interestingly, to be clear, when I say low skill, high skill, this is really interesting. It actually, I don't mean in absolute terms. So the interesting finding has been, you could go all the way, in terms of published research, you can go all the way down to call center workers, traditionally a relatively low skill job. And there, within there, though, there's a low skill and a high skill group. And only the low skill call center workers really show significant productivity benefits from essentially, in their case, a little AI agent that advises them on the call. Now we march up the supposed value chain to, in particular, this research on BCG consultants. And so we've gone up the absolute value chain, but again, the lower skill, less experienced BCG consultants show most of the benefits of using, in this case, LLM GPT, and the high skill ones don't so much. So in that sense, these the benefits in science and engineering, which was the area this group was looking at, essentially patentable stuff, was one of the very first papers to show an alternate pattern, which is within the field, a relatively high skill groups accumulated most of the benefits. And then the reason they showed is these tools were showing all of these possible outcomes. Let's just, I'll ground it for you. Imagine we're talking about AlphaFold. So this is the reinforcement learning model from that won the Nobel Prize, essentially. This year in chemistry, it comes up with all these literally millions and millions of different possible protein foldings. But which of those are actual likely proteins to exist in the real world? AlphaFold doesn't know what's real or not. It just knows what's possible in a sense. And so it finds all of these configurations. It also doesn't necessarily know what has an application to a particular disease or cure or what have you. So essentially what the finding was is tools like that allow you to explore these huge hypothesis spaces. There, people with experience were given all of these possible outcomes, were able to pick the ones that were really valuable and would turn into something amazing. In other words, forgive my self-congratulations here, but what I've been saying for quite some time, which is AI knows everything but understands nothing. So here it produces literally, not just every imaginable protein, because most of these we've never imagined before, but it produces every physical possible protein. But it is these elite humans that are able to then say, oh, but it's this new class that's really interesting. Let's pursue that. And lower skill, let's say bioengineers, weren't able to really benefit from these systems. As opposed to, just to give you a concrete counterexample, essentially the way most commercial AI is being sold right now. Let it read your email for you. Let it help you with your search, whether it's just generic search or search my Notion, for example, I use a lot, has a nice sort of LLM-based search component put into it. It's a little bit better than a generic keyword search system, but actually under the hood, most of these are what are called LLM plus RAG models, blanking for the moment on what RAG stands for. But essentially, RAG just means it does a traditional search behind the scenes, and then the LLM interprets the results for you. So it isn't really fundamentally discovering stuff that the original search wouldn't have discovered. It just better matches your query against those search results. So there's value add. But interestingly, the value add goes mainly to less experienced people that couldn't think of more creative ways to do their searches, that didn't think, oh, because of this, then that, then I can search here. So back to your specific question about teachers, in the context of what I'm saying, they are neither low skilled nor high skilled, but rather the question is across teachers. So we might have master teachers at one end and relatively early career, big finding is your first 3 to 5 years as a teacher are largely a disaster. And one of the big problems is that at-risk school districts are almost entirely populated by early career teachers. All those teachers are seniority get their pick of where they want to go, so they get to go to the better schools. Very few of them, I'm sure it's not in zero, but very few of them choose to go to high-risk school systems. And I know this intimately, obviously, from my wife's time running science for the San Francisco school system. And you can just see as soon as the best high-skilled teachers really get experience, accumulate a real basis for doing the job well, they stop working in Bayview, Hunters Point, the hard luck side of San Francisco, and they go work at Lowell in these elite schools if they can get there. And so all these at-risk schools are just high turnover. All the teachers are there for less than 3 to 5 years. They never really learn how to do the job. So one of the reasons Norma was always a bit down on Teach for America, really well-intentioned, but those people weren't making a career in teaching. They were just putting in 3 to 5 years. Well, guess what? Then it's very unlikely that they were really good teachers, because that's the burn-in time you need to get good at it. And no more than, after 3 to 5, before 3 to 5 years, you'd be really good as a lawyer. You might know all the facts, all the case law. You might be really driven, but do you truly know how to do it? So that's the kind of skill level I'm talking about. But I'll also get to what you were referring to. It ought to be a high skill job. Social elder care, child care, and policing, but it ain't. We could tell ourselves all these stories about how much we treasure people that make these civil service career sacrifices. But ultimately the amount that we pay them kind of tells the story. And other than highly unionized firefighters, and I always remembered if there was a pothole in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there were at least 3 cops and 2 firefighters standing around it watching one guy shovel. Boy, did they have great unions. Genuinely, by contract, they had to be there if that work was getting done, which is, of course, absurd. I'm a modest supporter of unions, but that sort of thing is exactly why people get down on them. So if you use LLMs, we'll kind of really focus on that, but to some degree we could throw in diffusion models, creating images and so forth. If you're using that to help you do your teaching, and your relatively early career, I'd be super worried that you never learn how to do your job, because that's what all the research shows in people learning how to do things. AI tutors mean they never learn. If you are a more senior teacher, then you very likely show very little AI benefit on day one. The first day it shows up in the classroom, in a sense, because you already have a system. You already are in this process, but you give it a little bit. Some training, some career development work, a little bit of shared collaborative stuff, again, amongst these more experienced people, then I think you can begin to see some real benefit. But I'll just keep pounding on what I keep saying. You've got to break away from the idea that this is all about efficiency gain, that the whole point of AI in the classroom is to cut your grading time in half. Hey, I'm totally fine if that is a sort of collateral outcome of the process, my wife and I are big believers that AI in the classroom should cut your grading time essentially to zero, because let's just skip all of the formative assessments and just have all of the summative assessments and just have continuous, deep, real-time, naturalistic formative assessments. And if you're not up on the terminology, I just mean assessments that are meant to inform the instructor on where the child's at and where they need to keep working. You can really focus on competency-based education. You can really do individualizing, all the promises that have always been there for AI in education. But overwhelmingly, you don't actually see that happening. What you simply see is read this essay and give me a grade for this student. And interesting enough, that actually produces more conformity. Doesn't matter. We could go all the way to sort of GPT 0, these cutting edge models. It still is very sort of conforming in its outputs. It lifts the median creativity of humans working with it, though it doesn't lift the high end very much. But it also, if you look at individual creativity of people using these systems, it lifts that medium, but not the very top. The best humans are still more creative than these systems, even the bleeding edge of them. But it actually decreases the creativity, let's call it, of the whole market. People explore fewer ideas. So I guarantee you, if you just let it do the grading for you, it essentially is going to kind of treat everybody a little bit the same, really constrain the ideas, unless the teacher is truly being kind of aggressive. I'll borrow the term, they're being a cyborg, actively working with, pushing back against the AI, working with it and understanding the student, in which case you don't see any of those grading time benefits because you're putting as much time into it. But if you do that, you get better assessments that are more realistic assessments of what the child is capable of. Everyone keeps looking for cutting my grading time in half rather than make my grading time 10 times as valuable. And unfortunately, the latter is, to me, the true value gain of AI. The former is a dead end. And I'm just heartened to see at least one paper seeing a population of people tapping into that latter potential.